Chapter 161, Kai Grace. She. The green head card presented by the respectful room was turned over to his hand. Shen Lang was pondering Wen Ziyi's temper. It was better to call that noble person to serve him today, and his gentleness and pettiness were also interesting, but after Zhang Bao came up and whispered in his ear, his eyebrows suddenly raised. The bottom of the eyes was first surprised, then playful. Zhang Bao hesitated a little. This matter is not in line with etiquette. Should you drive it away? Shen Lang raised his hand. No, I want to hear it. She wants to say something. Zhang Bao was slightly surprised, and his heart beat secretly. The dark tide of the government and the opposition is surging. At this time, Miss Kua Gongfu, who is in the center of the whirlpool, dares to boldly ask to see the emperor. What are the plans? It's just that he didn't dare to show it, so he went to Xianxiashu to come in. Xiaoshu has been waiting outside for a long time. She thought that she would be scared and apprehensive about her choice at the moment, but looking at the light shining through the window in the Jianqing Palace, her mind was clearer than ever. My aunt was wrong, very wrong. The most honorable person in the world is the emperor, even though she is the queen mother and the biological mother of the emperor. How can she oppose the emperor? Not to mention supporting the king of Linzi. Shenju is certainly gentle and elegant, but it is not enough for Xiaoshu to have to marry. Originally took a fancy to him, but because of the position of the princess of Linzi, but the emperor had no children, and he wanted to make Shenju the emperor's younger brother. She is not only for the position of the princess, but also for the position of the queen with great possibilities in the future. But now, first, Wen Ziyi is pregnant, and second, she has angered Zhang Boyu by discrediting Zhang Xuning, and she has clearly tested the emperor's attitude towards the Xiao family, so what else is there not to understand? My aunt's words were not wrong. There are no fathers and sons in the heavenly family. In fact, not only does the heavenly family have no father and son, but all the power and wealth in the court, the family affection is extremely indifferent. The common people in the market pay attention to the filial piety of their fathers and sons, but because they have nothing but family affection, but for those who have power, they have the opportunity to have everything in the world, and what is family affection compared to it? So, what is the rise and fall of the Shah family to her? What's more, she can't protect herself. Zhang Bao came out to pass the word. She thanked her, bowed inside, and bowed first. Shen Lang looked at her condescendingly. The slap print on Xiaoshu's cheek was particularly obvious in the dim light, but it also set off a bit of pitiful taste, and the emperor of the Yan'ao played with the green head card in his hand, and said with interest, "My cousin has never been close to my cousin, and now that the palace gate is about to be keyed, why did you come to me?" Xiaoshu said, "I am here to surrender myself to my highness." Shen Lang's eyes flashed slightly. Oh. Xiaoshu knew that life and death, honor and disgrace were all in today's world, so she secretly clenched her fingers, and finally turned her heart sideways, and said, "Zhang Shilang was a meritorious servant from the dragon back then, and he has always looked at the eyes of the saint and acted. If you don't agree, give him 10 dares, and he won't dare to play. It's just that Zhang Shilang is not a good person. If no one is angry, he won't wade into troubled waters. Whether it is a discussion with relatives or an old disaster relief case, it is all in your mind. The courtiers have been in the Xiao family for a long time, and there is no doubt about the big and small matters. Angering Zhang Shilang to impeach the Xiao family was the first case of a courtier's daughter's surrender to the saint. If the saint wants to raise his sword to the Xiao family, the courtiers are willing to sacrifice their modest strength." Shen Lang looked at her, his eyes deepened, but he sneered, "With you, you are so high-sounding, I'm afraid I don't want to go to that barbarian land to make peace with the Tatars." A little cold sweat broke out on Xiaoshu's forehead. She closed her eyes and said, "I beg the holy grace." Shen Lang finally stood up, the green-headed card with the name of Zhang Gairan in his hand turned around between his fingers, and he actually stretched out and raised Xiao Shu's delicate chin, squinted his eyes slightly, and said, "Isn't my cousin going to choose Princess Linzi? But how can I be gracious?" Although the emperor's fingers did not touch his skin, the frivolity of the feasible stops was as if he were facing a prostitute. The feeling of humiliation immediately came flooding over. But Xiao Shu blinked. After all, she could only forcibly press it down. Her fingers trembled slightly, put it on her neckline, and under Shen Lang's scorching gaze, she slowly unbuttoned the front of her body and took it off. On an early spring night, the cold is still heavy. As soon as the snow-white skin was revealed, he trembled. The majestic place is undulating like a mountain, and the low depression is graceful, and the full place cannot be grasped, and the slender place is not a hand. Kneeling at Shen Lang's feet, the old pride was all broken, but in an instant, it turned into endless hatred. A tear spilled into the soft carpet, and she calmly heard her own deliberately lowered soft voice, "I beg the Holy Grace to be gracious." Chapter 162, Past Life Trajectory. Spring nights, rain, and dew grow. Zhengbao stood outside the Jianqing palace and frowned quietly. The eunuch in the respectful room saw that the emperor turned over the green card, and before he could settle down, a girl from the Xiao family came, which made him really a little worried, and couldn't help lowering his voice and asking Zhengbao, "Look, do you still announce that the nobles are coming to bed?" Zhengbao heard the movement inside, and his delicate face was shrouded in a layer of gloom under the warm yellow light of the palace lamp on the side, and he only said, "I'm afraid it's not necessary." Early the next morning, the emperor dismissed. The ministers who entered the palace to prepare for the court meeting were all confused, but the well-informed eunuchs came to the front of Xiao Yuan, the Duke of Dingguo, and their attitude seemed to be more attentive than before. Xiao Yuan naturally didn't scratch his head. In the past, it was common for Xiao Shu to stay in the palace to serve the Queen Mother, so if she didn't come back last night, it was not a big deal in Xiao Yuan's opinion, and she usually returned the next morning. Unexpectedly, after he returned home, he still didn't see anyone. He was about to send someone to inquire, but the housekeeper outside came with a shocked look on his face to report that the eunuch in the palace had sent a decree. Xiao Yuan was frightened at this time, thinking that something big had happened, but when he arrived in the hall to listen to the decree, he saw that it was Wang Xinyi, the eunuch who held the authority in the palace, who came to announce the decree, and he was even more worried. Wang Xinyi was full of smiles. "Congratulations to Grandpa Guo, congratulations to Grandpa Guo." Xiao Yuan was stunned, and was at a loss for a while. "What congratulations?" Wang Xinyi is an old fox in the palace, only when what happened last night was carefully planned by the Xiao family, and Xiao Yuan was just pretending in front of him, so he actually stretched out his hand and patted Xiao Yuan's shoulder, and there was a little pull in his smile. "Ling I stayed in Jianqing Palace last night. I don't dare to call Miss Xiao this morning. I want to call me concubine Xian." Xiao Yuan was stunned at first, but then his face changed drastically. "What did you say?" Asterisk. "Really, didn't you see the battle when you came to deliver the decree this morning?" Xiao Dingfei's eyes were shining, and when he described the scene this morning, he was even more dancing, lest Zhang Xuning not believe it. "What treasures of jade, silk, gold, and silver, all like flowing water. I got up early in the morning and looked. Oh, there was a whole courtyard. When I asked, I found out that Xiao Shu's stinky girl went to the palace to sleep with the emperor all night, but she earned face for herself, and directly became a concubine." "Ha ha ha, you didn't see Xiao Yuan's face. I saw that he was almost about to vomit." Zhang Xuaning's fingers clutched the teacup, and slowly tightened one by one. "Right now, I'm still in that garden. The snow-white pear blossoms have bloomed early, adorned on the wall, and the wind blows so thin that it looks like a trembling piece of paper. The sound of silk and bamboo comes from the stage below, accompanied by the lingering singing voice of Wunong's soft language in the south, which attracts a lot of applause from the people around the theater. Upstairs, the seat was quiet. Because of the secret plot and the discussion of relatives, Xiao Ding very much wanted to inform Jiang Xuning of the situation outside, because he had often met these days, and he chose to be in this opera garden. One is that people come and go, and the most dangerous is the safest, and the other is that the two of them are generally virtuous, they are both fun and hedonistic, and they are not willing to find any too serious tea garden piano houses. Xiao Dingfei also wanted to talk to Jiang Xuning about the gossip he had heard all the way, so that she could be happy. But as soon as I took a sip of tea to moisten my throat and was about to speak, I saw her gloomy and tense face by mistake, and my heart jumped sharply, and I unconsciously stopped. What's wrong with you? Stay in the Qianqing palace and seal the concubine. These words pierced Jiang Xuaning's ears like needles, making her stinging and hardly feeling half of the pleasure. She really did it? In the previous life, Xiao Shu was Jiang Xuaning's sworn enemy. In those days when Feng Chenhao accompanied the reading, the other party was the bright moon in the sky and the pearl on the earth. Has a better background than her, has a higher knowledge than her, and is good friends with Shen Zai, and everyone follows her. Later, the other party also entered the palace. The mother's family was strong, won the hearts of the people, and there was the support of the queen mother's old witch behind her. Even if she was the queen at that time, it was difficult to please the other party under heavy pressure, and she suffered a lot of losses openly and secretly. In Jiang Xuaning's eyes, Xiao Shu behaved properly and was well calculated, and she was a model of a noble girl cultivated by a big family in the capital, and she was definitely more suitable for the position of queen than her weed-like temperament. In her bones, she should be arrogant and conceited. Even in this life, Jiang Xuaning did not have any thoughts of underestimating the enemy. But she didn't expect that Xiao Shu would be so willing to be cheap, and she would be committed to Shen Lang. For a while, an unprecedented feeling of confusion came to her heart, which made Jiang Xuaning fall into a fog, and then it turned into an unspeakable absurdity, and even made her laugh out loud. Times change, and she also has times when she is forced to this field. Xiao Dingfei inexplicably felt chills behind him. He cautiously approached Jiang Xuaning, looked at her expression, and said, "Shouldn't she be happy like this? It's good for her to give away a free game first, and she is not afraid that the emperor will not give money. Now all over the capital are talking about her, so she got a concubine, but under this stupid trick, her reputation has also been ruined." Faint move. Jiang Xuaning sneered, "You really gave her away for nothing. Is the emperor's concubine really given for free?" The Xiao family is now in the vortex of criticism, but the emperor's attitude has always been ambiguous. Although tomorrow will be the choice of a concubine, it is impossible for Shenju to risk the disapproval of the world to choose Xiao Shu as his princess. This person is elegant and affectionate, but there is a cowardly part of nature. When she married him as a princess, seeing that he has always sought advantages and avoided disadvantages, and was not willing to be involved in many battles in the court. But his imperial brother Shen Lang is a completely different person. Although the emperor in the previous life was unusually short-lived, and she died violently due to illness 2 years after she married Shenji, and there was no more contact with her except for the family banquets in the palace on Mid-Autumn Festival and Chinese New Year's Eve, Jiang Xuaning could hardly forget the eyes of the other party when he was standing on the throne and looking down at people. Moody, indulgent, and repetitive. Remembers that the last time she entered the palace as a princess was in the Mid-Autumn Festival. At that time, Shenju had already been established as the emperor's younger brother, and Shen Lang had been taking the 5-stone powder refined by Fang Shi for a long time. He collapsed on the throne with a psychedelic face, and when he saw Shenju entering with her, his gloomy and flickering gaze fell on her, and after saying a few words, Shenju realized that something was wrong, so he said that he had something to say to Shen Lang alone, and let her retreat first. She was uneasy in her heart and buried her head in retirement. But until she withdrew and sat down in the side hall to wait, she still felt that the snake-like gaze was still glued to her, which made her feel a chill. I don't know what the two brothers talked about that day. Shenju, who has always been peaceful and elegant, actually came out of it with a blue face, went back to the palace and entered the study, and never came out. Jiang Xuning was still willing to please this husband at that time. She pondered to make a cup of chicken and pigeon soup stew in the kitchen, and brought it to the study herself in the middle of the night. As usual, the study is in and out with her. But on this day, someone outside stopped her. The little guy went in to pass the word, and Shenju came out of it. When the door of the study outside was opened, Jiang Xuning saw that there were many people sitting inside. On the position of leaning against Duo Baoj by the window was a corner of snow-white Taoist robe. Xia Wei turned his face to meet her gaze. It's just that before she could react, the crack in the door had been closed, and standing in front of her was Shenju, who smiled gently at her. Shenju personally took the cup of soup she brought, and said that she would go back to the room later, and then instructed her to send her back to the house carefully. Jiang Xuning went back to lie down, but it took a long time to fall asleep. Until the sky was dark, a cold body came into the already warm quilt and hugged her. She struggled to open her eyes, and saw that the window paper was already a dark blue after dawn. The next time she saw Shen Lang, it would be in the grand coffin that the emperor put into when he died. Therefore, Jiang Xuning really doesn't know much about this emperor who is currently controlling the life and death of others, and it can be inferred from all kinds of clues that he is definitely not a benevolent monarch and sage who is dedicated to the world. Shen Lang is more like a madman. Xiao Shu framed her for Yu Ruyi at a young age, and she was not a good person. If she didn't pay enough price, Shen Lang would not ignore the world's Yu and make her a concubine. And this emperor's mind is also really difficult to measure, not to mention sending someone to send him back to the mansion in the early morning to canonize it, and directly let people stay in the palace to return to the early dynasty. He really refuses to do any face-saving effort, so that Xiao Shu will be ridiculed by the world, which is not ruthless. Carefully combing through what happened before and after, the emperor's attitude towards the Xiao family obviously made Xiao Shu feel the crisis, and the old witch in Sinning Palace was even willing to give up her own daughter. What was her niece's daughter? Xiao Shu is arrogant. In the last life, she fought with her for the position of queen, and when she was a concubine, she welcomed into the palace to pomp and circumstance, and she was better than the queen of the main palace. Yes. There is indeed only one way. Jiang Xuning lowered her gaze, looked at the beautiful teacup in her hand, and said to herself, broken tail to survive, Jedi counterattack. I don't know whether I look down on her or underestimate her. She thought that Xiao Shu should disdain to do such a humiliating and committed thing. Xiao Dingfei could clearly feel that her mood was wrong, and when he thought about it, he understood where the key to the matter was. The eldest princess of Liang. Xiao Shu, who was originally clamoring to be pushed out to replace Shen Zai and his relatives, has been named the imperial concubine. How can there be any reason in the world to let the emperor's woman go to kiss? Xiao Shu seems to have a bad reputation, but she has saved herself. That Shen Zai. Smack. The half-full teacup flew up steeply and smashed into the beautiful painting screen in front of it, and it shattered instantly, and the cold tea splashed in all directions, staining the beautiful landscape painted on the screen. Jiang Xuning stared expressionlessly and didn't move for a long time. Chapter 163, Princess Linzi. On this day, Jiang Xuning sat in the opera garden until evening. Xiao Dingfei, who was playing with her on weekdays, didn't dare to provoke her at all, so he only quietly peeled the melon seeds and peanuts sent to her completely, cleanly, and put them next to her. But Jiang Xuning didn't eat half of it. It wasn't until the sun was setting outside that she stood up as if she had finally made a decision, and wanted to go outside. Xiao Dingfei subconsciously asked, the men of Wen'ang outside, and the flower children on the street, do you still continue to take care of them? Zhang Xuning said, why not? Xiao Dingfei was stunned, but this matter has been. Zhang Xuning actually said, she made me uncomfortable, and I didn't let her feel better. Xiao Dingfei was finally speechless, and watched her walk out of the garden. The day before, the government and the opposition were still discussing the matter of reinvestigating the Xiao family, but today they were all taken aback by the news that Xiao Shu was crowned concubine. At this kind of cusp of the storm, the emperor actually sealed Xiao Shu in the center of the vortex as a concubine. Isn't it clear that he wants to favor the Xiao family and favor Xiao Shu? But in the evening, new news came. Zhang Boyu, the head of the household department, participated in the excerpt of Xiao Yuan, the prince of the country, was handed over to the cabinet, and after the deliberation of the auxiliary ministers, the case of the Ganzhou disaster relief silver that year will be reinvestigated. The following military officials were all confused, saying that the emperor handled it impartially. He first made Xiao Shu a concubine, said that the emperor was biased, and reinvestigated the case of Ganzhou disaster relief silver without mercy. Even Xiao Yuan himself couldn't figure it out, and he was uneasy about it. Only Zhang Xuning could vaguely guess something. The emperor's couch is the most taboo for others to sleep soundly. If Xiao Shu is not trustworthy, she should not be believed, and Shen Lang will not be able to make her a concubine. Pushing back with the emperor's mental tricks, how can a noble girl from a big family gain the emperor's trust? There is only one answer, to cut off one's own wings and draw a clear line. When Xiao Shu voluntarily gave up her original dependence, it was equivalent to throwing away all her weapons, and all threats to the emperor were lifted. From then on, her honor and disgrace were tied to the man next to the pillow, and she could only advance and retreat with him, and die together. For Shen Lang, one can serve the bed, and the other can help him bring down the Xiao family. And such a beauty, what reason does he have to refuse? Zhang Xuning sneered in her heart, and when she returned to Jiang's mansion, she heard that the Meng family was very happy, and asked Zhang Suiwai to go to her room and talk for an afternoon. I also know that Xiao Shu, who was originally going to run for the Princess of Linzi, suddenly entered the palace as a concubine, so Zhang Suiwai would not have the biggest opponent, and Shenju was interested in Zhang Suiwai first, and it was expected that the selection of the concubine should be 9 out of 10. She didn't even bother to join in the fun. Before dawn the next day, the whole house was busy, and across the yard, you could hear the maids painting makeup for Zhang Suiwai and making skirts. Zhang Xuning was lying on the bed, sleeping lazily in the spring morning, staring at the white peony embroidered on the top of the tent, but remembering this day in her previous life. The house is also so busy. But at that time, the person who was in the crowd fiddling with all kinds of hairpins was herself. Although Meng Shi also arrived in her room, the joy in her expression looked somewhat reluctant, especially when she looked at it with a little pampering. Meng Shi's face was even more unsightly. Zhang Suiwai only stood next to Meng Shi and looked at her deeply. At that time, she was very proud in her heart, because Zhang Suiwai didn't know that she had seen the embroidered handkerchief in the palace, and deliberately impersonated her, so she had the opportunity now. Zhang Suiwai robbed her of her affection, and she wanted to rob Zhang Suiwai's love. She didn't want them to be better off anyway. Just tortured others, didn't he torture himself? Shenju is certainly a gentle and elegant handsome gentleman, with the affection of a literati, but he is not an infatuated person like a man in the world. Maybe it was because he gradually discovered that she was not the person who made him feel excited, right? When he was newly married 2 years ago, he was like glue, and he easily coaxed him to be reluctant to leave him, but after he ascended the throne, the court criticized, the queen mother put pressure on the new person, and Xiao Shu entered the palace. In the end, he changed the old person, and he only maintained a little affection for her, the queen. After all, it is not your own. Jiang Suiwei has it, and it may not be what she likes. After lying down for a long time, Jiang Xuning got up. It's not that I want to see how Jiang Suiwei is, but today happens to be the day when the eunuchs in the palace take turns to rest, and she wants to find someone. Xiao Shu became the imperial concubine, and the original plan was unusable. Time was running out for her. When she washed up and walked out of her courtyard, Jiang Xuning happened to bump into Jiang Suiwei, who was surrounded by many maids on the other side, and was rarely dressed up a little brightly, with a delicate face and exquisite makeup, but she was dignified and quiet. She held a silk handkerchief embroidered with red ginger flowers on one of the corners. Jiang Xuning glanced at her, and saw that Meng Shi was also beside her, so she didn't even bother to say hello, and walked straight over. In this life, she has changed many things: her relationship with Xiaowei, Wen Ziyi's pregnancy, the rise and fall of the Yan family, the selection of Princess Linzi, and the time when Xiao Dingfei entered Beijing. So, why can't she save Shen Ziyai? Whether the world is like Meng, like Jiang Suiwei or Shenju, even if you want to choose a concubine today, you don't feel that there is much difference from yesterday and tomorrow. But as far as Jiang Xuning is concerned, every day she is fighting to the death against the established fate, and she refuses to bow her head and admit defeat. Asterisk. Zheng Bao rested today. Since he was favored by his master Wang Xinyi and transferred to serve by the emperor's side, his status in the palace can no longer be the same as in the past. It's not that he is greedy for gold and silver, but the palace is like this: if others are filial and you don't want to accept it, you will become the target of the public, and others will inevitably be taboo and wary of you. Therefore, although the time spent in the Qianqing palace on an errand was not long, he also saved a lot of silver. 70% was given to the family, and the mother was given to the brother as a dowry. Sanchinj left it to himself, and finally moved out of his house and set up a small courtyard in Sanli Hutong. Since seeing Xiao Shu enter the Qianqing palace that day, Zheng Bao had a faint premonition in his heart, so today Xiao Mu did not go out and walk around as usual, but sat under the eaves and waited. Sure enough, as soon as the morning fog cleared, there was a knock on the door outside. He got up and walked over to open the door. The second girl, Zhang, with a very bright face, stood in front of his shabby courtyard, wearing a dark purple cloak, but her eyes were like quiet snow in the middle of the night, bright but with a little coolness. When she looked at it, it made people's hearts widen, as if all distracting thoughts had been cleared. Zheng Bao stepped aside. Jiang Xuning held the cloak in one hand, but didn't take a step inside, just looked at him and said, "I'm here to ask you to repay your kindness." Zheng Bao only wore a simple light cyan round-necked robe at home, with red lips and white teeth, and he was in a trance when he heard the words. His delicate face reminds people of the smoke and rain in the south of the Yangtze River. Jiang Xuning suddenly didn't dare to look directly at these eyes that were too clear, so she slowly lowered her eyes, suppressed the trace of guilt, and said almost cruelly, "I'm sorry." In front of Cunning Palace that day, it should be Her Royal Highness the eldest princess who really saved you. Can you please repay the favor? Asterisk. As the king of Linzi, who the emperor trusts and even almost becomes the emperor's younger brother, Shenju wants to choose a concubine, which is definitely the first major event in the spring after the beginning of the year, except for the eldest princess and relatives. The palace has been busy for a long time. Although this matter was handled by Empress Zheng herself, everything had to be reported to the Empress Dowager Xiao to know, and today it should be the Empress Dowager who is in charge of the overall situation. However, yesterday Xiao Shu was the concubine, and after the news came out, Empress Dowager Xiao was furious for some reason, had a lot of anger, and became ill. Xiao Shu went to serve the sick, but was also kicked out. The well-informed people in the palace felt that this matter was unusual, and there was a rumor of ups and downs secretly. Empress Zheng also muttered in her heart. However, This is an excellent opportunity for her. It is rare for her to preside over the overall situation. If she does it well, she will re-enter the eyes of the emperor, and it will be logical to take back the control of the 6 palaces from the hands of Empress Dowager Xiao. Therefore, Empress Zheng is more dedicated than ever. The location of the concubine selection is set in the Chuxia Palace, and the palace people led people into the palace early in the morning. After all, it is the royal family's selection, and there should be a lot of places to check, and the last pass is to put these candidates in front of everyone, and determine the result. When Shenju entered the palace, he first went to meet the Queen Mother and the Emperor. Therefore, Empress Zheng sat on the main seat of Chuxia Palace and drank tea first, and talked to Wen Ziyi, who was pregnant and promoted to a position next to her and had white and tender skin. Unexpectedly, before he could say a word, he heard the eunuch outside singing in a shrill voice, "Concubine Xian Niang has arrived." Empress Zheng and Wen Ziyi's eyelids jumped at the same time. Looking up again, Xiao Shu, who was still reading with Yang Zhizai and Miss Xiao a while ago, now has a black hair plait in a high bun, inserts 2 golden steps, and sticks a plum petal-like flower in the center of her eyebrows. The palace often replaces the old with the new, not to mention that the saint now likes the new and hates the old the most. Although Empress Zheng also felt uncomfortable, she had seen this kind of thing a lot, and she could still hold it on her face, but she only disdained that Xiao Shu's dignified lady had done such a shameless thing. Wen Ziyi felt much more uncomfortable. She didn't know anything about her pregnancy before, and she didn't know it from the imperial doctor, so she knew that this harem was under the control of others. Now that Empress Dowager Xiao is sick, her niece and nephew have entered the palace again, and she is still a concubine. She has a dragon seed in her stomach, and she has only just been promoted to Ziyi. When she saw Xiao Shu, her face was not very good. There are rumors inside and outside the palace, how can Xiao Shu not know? But no matter how much she hates in her heart, she is the one who makes the decision. She knew what to do, so she forced herself to turn a deaf ear. No matter what, she had achieved her goal, and even became the emperor's favorite concubine overnight. What could others do to her? The concubine has seen the queen's mother. Xiao Shu's identity in the past was not ordinary, and it was always very simple to salute the queen, but now she also didn't put the queen in her eyes, and bowed slightly. The queen smiled reluctantly, and she didn't say much. Now it's time to call Sister Xian. Wen Ziyi pursed her lips coldly, put her hand on the belly. She was already pregnant, deliberately didn't get up, and said lazily, "It stands to reason that I should give a salute to concubine Xian, but I am pregnant, my baby is very weak, and I dare not toss, so I ask concubine Xian Niang to forgive me." Xiao Shu smiled, "It's okay, please ask for it later." Wen Ziyi is only 1 step away from the concubine position. As long as the prince is successfully born, the position of the concubine is not a problem. Xiao Shu's words seem ordinary, but the meaning is extremely vicious. Wen Ziyi's complexion changed instantly, and the 5 fingers on the armrest were clenched tightly, and she almost had a seizure on the spot. Empress Zheng was busy playing the round and asked with a smile, "Concubine Xian's sister concubine Feng is suddenly, all the palace rooms are preparing, and I haven't had time to see each other yet. It's just that today, the Lieutenant General of Chuxia Palace will choose the princess for His Royal Highness King Linzi, and I don't know if the sister of the virtuous concubine is coming, right?" There was already a palace man next to him who moved a chair. Xiao Shu Shiran sat down and replied lightly, "The Holy Lord is entangled in government affairs, and I can't rest assured that His Royal Highness the King of Linzi will choose a concubine, so I will invite myself to come and watch some for the Holy Lord. The Queen Mother doesn't mind, right? Please." Empress Zheng blocked it in one breath, but she didn't know what to say, so she slowed down for a while before she reluctantly laughed, and said, "Holy care, naturally it is the best." Xiao Shu laughed softly and stopped talking. After a while, Shenju, the king of Linzi, went to the emperor and the queen mother to ask for peace, and entered the Chuxia palace, wearing a crescent white python robe, with a jade pendant hanging from his waist, and his face was as elegant and warm as jade, but his complexion did not seem to be particularly good. When he came in and saw Xiaoshu, he was also stunned for a moment. But his mind was full of reprimands from the imperial brothers, especially the queen mother, and he didn't bother to care at all, and after saluting the imperial sister-in-law, he sat down. At this time, the palace talent introduced the candidates of the noble ladies of each province, and after screening, the number was not large, and the 6 people stood in a row, and many of the companions in the original Yang Zizai were among them. Zhang Suiwai, Chen Chuyi, Yao Rongrong, and A Tangled Face. Her father was Qin Tianjian, and she had been a companion in Yang Zizai, so she was naturally able to enter the list of candidates for princess. Fang Miao felt that this matter had nothing to do with him, so he went through the motions. But they shouldn't have been, and they didn't know what was wrong with the palace, so they wanted to come to the palace early in the morning. So when she was urged to go out by the maids, she pinched her fingers and counted. Mao is 3 moments, it will be clear and unknown, it will be dark or not, the alternation of yin and yang has not yet ended, it is the evil that is rampant and uncertain, and it is by no means a good time to go out. In front of the gate of the palace, I saw the blue light hanging in the southeast. Fang Miao couldn't help but find out the copper coin he had hidden in his sleeve to calculate, and actually calculated a bad omen for himself, and he was so frightened for a while that he couldn't turn around and go home immediately, just afraid that there would be a bloody disaster this time. She stood between Zhang Suiwai and Chen Chuyi, compared to these 2 young ladies who were born in a scholarly family and are also dressed very brightly today, although she also wore a very beautiful goose yellow elastic ink skirt, with pink cheeks and zoo on her lips, it was not inconspicuous at all. When he came in and saw Xiaoshu sitting above, Fang Miao muttered in his heart. Originally, everyone was still a classmate of Feng Chindian, and in the blink of an eye, a few good-looking hairs had been inserted into their butts to make a golden pheasant peacock, and they didn't know what they were doing today. Zhang Suiwai stood quietly on the side, and an embroidered handkerchief leaked out of the corner between her fingers. As soon as she entered, Shenju's gaze fell on her. There was a snow-white jade ring in the lacquer plate that the eunuch next to him held. He took it and stood up, and was about to walk towards Zhang Suiwai. Wen Ziyi suddenly smiled. However, Xiaoshu sneered when she saw it, and reminded lightly, the saint said that His Royal Highness's choice of concubine will extend the bloodline for the royal family, and the concubine is to enter the jade plate, and she must have a dignified character and an innocent background. Shenju's footsteps were stagnant. He saw Zhang Suiwai standing there with her eyebrows lowered and her eyes down, and remembered that when it rained that day, he made an appointment to meet Yan Lin, but he galloped forward but almost startled the carriage and horses of others, and finally pulled it, but accidentally splashed mud all over his body. The girl sitting inside was frightened. He thought they were going to be held accountable. I didn't think about it for a moment, but I stretched out a slender hand with flesh and blood, handed him an embroidered handkerchief, and only chuckled in a low voice, "Thank you Gongzi for saving me, let's wipe my face first." When he saw Yan Lin that day, he was distracted for a moment. Yan Lin asked him what was going on. As soon as he told him about it, Yan Lin asked for the embroidered handkerchief to see, and his eyes flickered and pondered for a while and said to him, "Look at this red ginger flower, the person in the carriage on that road must be the girl of the Zhang family." Shenju asked, "The eldest girl or the second girl?" Yan Lin rolled his eyes and said, "Ning Ning is the son of this world, and His Royal Highness is naturally the eldest girl of the Zhang family." In fact, after a long time, he almost forgot about the voice that lowered his chuckle, leaving only the handkerchief embroidered with red ginger flowers on the side as a touch of qi still by his side. Shenju thought that if he chose the princess, he should choose the one that had made him excited. But why can't it be done? The second girl of the Zhang family spread the incident in Tongzhou a while ago, and even the reputation of other girls in the Zhang family's court was not good, otherwise he would not have paid attention to the reprimands of the Queen Mother and the royal brother today, and chose Zhang Suiwei directly. Zhang Suiwei once saved Wen Ziyi. Wen Ziyi naturally looked towards her, and hoped that Zhang Suiwei could be selected and become her future help. But the word saint mentioned by Xiao Shu in Xiao Shu's sentence made her grit her teeth and feel a little jealous. Since the emperor spoke, he didn't dare to stand hard. Wen Ziyi saw that Shenju was standing still, her eyes rolled, but she turned her words, and she took the initiative to persuade. Concubine Xian Niang is right, isn't it innocent to choose a concubine? If you have chosen a concubine, if you can't give it up, you can accept it as a side concubine, and you can't disobey the will of the saint. The jade ring, which represented the position of the concubine, was pinched in Shenju's hand for a long time and buckled tightly. Even though it is a royal bloodline, you are the king of Linzi. But his marriage is not up to him. Shenju naturally caught a glimpse of the red ginger embroidered handkerchief in Zhang Suiwei's hand, but Wen Ziyi's words brushed his ears, and his eyes raised to look at Zhang Suiwei. I don't know which lady on the side, her head is buried in her lips and her lips are moving, as if she is silently chanting. Although he felt that his face was good, he vaguely remembered that it was one of the several companions in Yang's his eye, but he didn't think it was very good looking, so he turned his eyes and went to the next one. So I saw Chen Chuyi. At this time, Xiao Shu said in the back, after all, the Holy Lord still values His Royal Highness, and his family background is high, and he is the most knowledgeable, and he can best assist His Highness and take care of the affairs of the palace. Shenju's heart suddenly felt an indescribable disgust. He originally thought that Chen Chuyi looked dignified and very good, but he was also disgusted at this time. The clay figure was still angry, he was unhappy, so he simply turned his head and handed the jade ring to the girl standing between Chen Chuyi and Zhang Suiwei, and said impatiently, since she was elected to the palace, naturally everyone is good, just her. At this moment, the entire Chuxia palace was silent. Fang Miao listened to the words hidden above his head, you come and go, only to feel that all of these people have good deeds, lest they disagree with each other and cause something to bring blood and light to themselves, so they recite the Diamond Sutra devoutly to ward off evil spirits and avoid disasters. The jade ring was handed to her, and she didn't even see it. Until the eunuch on the side raised his voice in a cold sweat and shouted for the third time, Miss Fang. Fang Miakai came back to his senses abruptly. When she raised her head, she only saw Shenju holding the jade ring in her hand and handing it to her, as if she didn't expect that she would be ignored, but her handsome face was faintly a little iron blue, and it was rare to have a little unkind look when staring at her. Fang Miao only realized what had happened at this time. She was suddenly shocked. Shenju didn't expect that there would be other people who chose a concubine and were also distracted, as if they didn't seem to be petitioning, so he sneered and asked, you don't want to? Fang Miao wanted to say that this is not a field that this god stick can mix. She opened her mouth, and the word unwilling was on her lips, but she suddenly remembered the evil omen she calculated when she went out, and then saw that the eyes of everyone around her fell on her, and a chill began to rise on her back. This is the emperor's brother. If you refuse in public, you are afraid that the bloodlight disaster will really come in the blink of an eye. Her previous sluggish movements immediately changed, and she quickly took the jade ring, bowed down and said, willing, courtier. Shenju. I don't know why, instead of disappearing, the anger has become even greater. Empress Zheng and Wen Ziyi looked at each other, and Xiao Shu didn't expect Shenju to choose Fang Miao and suddenly got up. Chen Chuyi on the side had an ugly face. Zhang Suiwei quietly tightened her fingers and slowly closed her eyes. Fang Miao smiled at Shenju, but it was really more ridiculous than crying, your uncle's sky thundered. I knew that the time to go out today was wrong, but now it really poured blood mold. Chapter 164, Loved Ones Her People. Zheng Bao sent Jiang Xuning out. The expression on his face did not fluctuate, as if what he had discussed in the past 2 hours was not something earth-shattering that would make people lose their heads once it was revealed. He only stood by the door and said, "The guards on the day of the kiss are bound to be strict. There is not much time left for the girl to act, and Zheng Bao can help that, and the rest is for the second girl Jiang to plan carefully." Jiang Xuning looked at him in a daze. Her steps were not easy when she came, and her steps were even heavier when she walked, and she opened her mouth several times, but she did not speak. Zheng Bao's peaceful and pure eyes seemed to see the guilt and uneasiness welling up in her heart, smiled at her as if relieved, and said, "Her Royal Highness the eldest princess is a good person, and she has a favor to repay her." Judging from the plan of the second girl Jiang, even if the incident happened, it was probably just a crime of negligence, and since the decision had been made, please don't hesitate. In the previous life, Zheng Bao was saved by Shenju, and after Shenju ascended the throne, he served by Shenju's side all the year round, and he could see him everywhere, and he was careful and cautious in doing things. It's just that this person is really inconspicuous, and Jiang Xuning usually doesn't pay much attention to it. It wasn't until Xie Wei and Yan Lin rebelled in the end, and this person silently drew his sword and martyred the master, so that others knew that there was such a bloody man with iron bones in the palace. She was silent for a long time. "But if you want to say anything, sorry, it is you who want others to repay your kindness. I really have no qualifications and position, but I bow before going down the steps, and I bow to this person who I didn't pay attention to in my last life." Because of her conspiracy, she went out by herself today, and when she returned, she walked slowly down the street. The fireworks in the market are all in the airs. Jiang Xuning was a little dazed, and when she waited near the glass factory, she went to find Zhou Yinzi again. Zhou Yin had betrayed her in his previous life, so she didn't dare to believe it all, and she didn't tell her plans, but only told him to do a few things, and only returned to Jiang's mansion after listening to the other party's promise. At this time, it is already the end of the day. The concubine of Shenju, the king of Linzi, is today. If it is similar to the previous life, the result should have been out at this time. Without her own trouble, Jiang Xuiwei also brought an embroidered handkerchief. This life should always be satisfactory, right? Sure enough, when she walked in the door, she saw the maids all smiling and talking. When I passed through the hall, I also saw that there were some rewards from the palace placed inside. Jiang Xuning thought about it. Her reputation in the previous life was not very good, and the old witch in the palace was even more strongly opposed, but Shenju directly chose herself, who carried a red ginger embroidered handkerchief. I don't see it on my face, but I miss the old feelings very much in my heart. Meng Shi and Jiang Xuiwei's courtyard were both leaning to the east, guessing that they should be happy. She was too lazy to look for their bad luck, and as soon as the direction of the solace of her feet turned, she was ready to go back to her courtyard from the veranda through the Weeping Flower Gate to the west. Who would have thought that before he arrived, there was a loud noise from the other end. It sounds like Jiang Xuiwei. "Mother, why do you have to go? Don't go. You let go, don't stop it." If it weren't for her bad reputation and getting in the way, where could she be cut off halfway? What age is it? Seeing that she is about to leave the cabinet, she is still running around outside. The upbringing that she invited someone to teach in the past has long been lost, and what kind of system will it become if it is passed out? I have to go to see when she will come back. Mother. Meng Shi's stomach was full of anger, his face was tense, and he walked briskly in front. The maids didn't dare to stop it, but Jiang Xuiwei couldn't stop it. Jiang Xuning faintly felt that the sign seemed to be coming towards him, and he was only stunned, and when he turned his head, he saw that he had already made a straight face with Meng Shi, who came out of there. Meng Shi is also a well-educated lady, but her face is unprecedentedly ugly at this moment, and when she saw her, she immediately shouted, "It's just right to come back, don't stop me yet." Jiang Xuning frowned, not understanding what was going on. She glanced at Jiang Suiwei next to her, only to find that the other party's face was slightly pale, and although her expression was calm, she could not hide the corners of her eyes and eyebrows, and she was not very happy. "Isn't the position of Princess Linza stable? What's not to like?" Jiang Xuning sneered inexplicably in her heart, and was already very impatient with Meng Shi. "What's the matter with mother? What's the matter, don't you know what's going on? My Jiang family, and sister Hui are about to become the laughing stock of the capital. It's good that she doesn't speak, but when she speaks, this straightforward posture makes Meng's heart attack even worse. If it weren't for you ruining your family's reputation and messing around with people everywhere, where would there be these things?" Jiang Shui heard the clue at this time. She raised her eyebrows, and she was really a little surprised. "Didn't you choose the position of princess?" This time it was really unexpected, and the surprise was not half fake. But in Meng's opinion, it was very dazzling. How it sounds like a provocation, how it looks like a mockery. Jiang Xuaning's gaze shifted from her to Jiang Suiwei's body, only to feel that this matter was a little incredible. Firstly, because Shenju chose her regardless of the words of others in the previous life, and secondly, because when she came back, she clearly saw that there were things in the palace in the hall that were rewarded for happy events. If you hadn't been chosen, where would you have given this? Don't. A possibility came to mind, but it was a bit ridiculous, and she shook her head and muttered, "That's weird." Meng finally couldn't bear it anymore. When she came out of Jiang Suiwei's courtyard, there were many maids and wives following, but halfway through, she saw Jiang Xuning coming back from outside at this hour. How many ladies in the capital are like her now? Earlier, he was mixed with Yan Lin, and now he is messing with Xiao Dingfei. The face of the entire Jiang family's inner house is about to be lost by her. Meng Shi's face was covered with frost, and he said coldly, "In the past, you were taught crooked by people with ulterior motives, but you can always find someone to protect you. Even the master can't cure you, and you have nothing to say. But His Royal Highness the King of Linza's choice of a concubine is a lifelong event for your sister, but you have been dragged down by your reputation, and you have missed the position of the main concubine, so you will be gossiped about if you take the position of a side concubine. You have passed your 19th birthday, and you are no longer at the age when you can fool around outside. If you don't restrain and discipline you, I don't know what even greater disasters will happen to him in the future." Jiang Xuning was stunned. Is she really a concubine? She looked at Jiang Suiwei. Jiang Suiwei recalled the embarrassment she faced when she chose the concubine, so when Ziyi spoke for her, Xiao Shu's words with guns and sticks, and the sarcastic eyes of others, which still made her feel a little rare embarrassment. Meng Shi waved his hand and called the two mothers-in-law with big shoulders and round waists beside him, and said, "Then invite the second girl back to me. From today onwards, I will be grounded in the mansion, and I will copy the female ring 180 times." The mothers-in-law got the order and immediately walked towards Jiang Xuning. After all, the Meng family is the master mother, although they also know that Jiang Xuning is not a master to be messed with. But this time she is dragging down the eldest girl to choose Princess Linza. Even if the master comes, he is afraid that he will not give her a good face, so he gritted his teeth and was ruthless, and decided to take a heavy hand as soon as Jiang Xuning showed signs of resisting. The development of things was not expected by Jiang Xuning at all. Jiang Suiwei was not selected as the concubine by Shenju. She was surprised at first, and then naturally gloated a little funny. Who made her not very accustomed to Jiang Suiwei? It's weird. In this life, she didn't get much of a hindrance, so it can be seen that these two people may not have any serious fate. It's just that Meng Shi blamed her for this matter, which made her sincerely feel a little disgusted, seeing the two mothers-in-law pressing towards her. Her heart rose sharply, and she frowned and picked up a wooden stick that was set up next to the flower stand and waved it indiscriminately. There is a ruthlessness in his heart, and he is naturally ruthless. The wooden stick hit the head and body, and it really hurt, and the two mothers-in-law didn't even have time to face Jiang Xuning, so they were beaten and screamed. Men knew that Jiang Xuning was stubborn and untamed, but he didn't expect that she not only dared to resist but also dared to make a move, and she almost fainted in anger, and scolded, "It's the opposite, it's the opposite." There was a lot of movement on the veranda. When Zhang Boyu came back from the yamen, he led Xie Wei to his study, and when he came over and saw Jiang Xuning beating the servant woman with a stick, his brows immediately furrowed, and he shouted, "What are you doing here?" Bump on the ground. After Jiang Xuning heard the sound, another wooden stick hit the back of the woman on the left, so painful that the other party fell to the ground, looked back, and then threw the stick to the ground and clapped his hands. Meng Shi trembled with anger, pointed at her and said, "Master, look at her, now this lawless appearance, I can't control it." Zhang Boyu sighed in his heart and only asked, "What's the matter?" Jiang Xuning stood in place, with a sneer on her lips, and did not reply. Xie Wei stood beside Zhang Boyu and also stopped. Because he came straight out of the cabinet, he wore a dark black cross-collared coat, which was layered below his neck, revealing the protruding Adam's apple. The official robe outside faded, but it was rare that he did not wear an ordinary Taoist robe, but changed into a dark blue embroidered silver cloud and thunder pattern crane and draped it. The body is like a sword on the top of the mountain, and the eyes are like two handfuls of snow at the bottom of the cliff. Compared with the hidden robe of the past, although today it is also as dusty as the breeze and the moon, it has a little more awe-inspiring and luxurious. The situation inside Jiang Mansion and Jiang Xuning's style, he seems to be an outsider, but he actually knows a lot about it. His eyes fell on Jiang Xuning, and he shook Meng Shi, Jiang Suiwai and the wooden stick on the ground, and the smile on his lips became slightly lighter. Meng Shi said, "She always goes out to mess around, and the concubine has the heart to discipline her, but she is rampant, and she has to pick up a stick and beat and scold her subordinates if she is not convinced." Zhang Boyu was really a little annoyed. No one wants outsiders to see the bad things in their own family. There are outsiders at the moment, and at a glance, he knows that the key is Jiang Xuning, so he said, "The rumors in the capital are indeed everywhere these days, Ning girl, although your mother's words are a little worrying, but there is some truth is also preparing to talk about marriage at the age of 210, that is, for his own good, it is time to be more restrained. Let's not pursue it today, but go back first." Zhang Boyu seemed to have said Jiang Xuning's words, but it was really a bit heavy to pick up and put it down gently. Meng Shi was full of resentment, and it was inevitable that he would lose his sense of proportion at this moment, showing a little dissatisfaction. "But master, if she hadn't ruined the reputation of the family and dragged down Sister Hui, how could Sister Hui be laughed at today, and only fall into the position of a side concubine?" Zhang Boyu's face changed instantly. Jiang Suiwai also realized that Meng's words were very inappropriate at this moment, and as soon as she pulled Meng's sleeve, she wanted to persuade her to leave first. Unexpectedly, Xie Wei, who had been standing next to him for a long time and had not spoken, suddenly laughed. He has a fairy face, and he looks good when he smiles. But when Wenran's voice came out, which made people feel a little uneasy for no reason, and he actually said to Meng Shi, "Is the position of the side concubine of His Royal Highness the King of Linza still insufficient?" Meng Shi was stunned for a moment. She had also seen this young master Xie in the past. His posture was gentle, he had the style of an ancient saint, and his speech also made people feel like a spring breeze. But at this moment, her words made her feel inexplicably frightened. "I didn't know how to answer." Xie Wei didn't even glance at Zhang Boyu next to him. He turned his eyes to look at Jiang Xuning, seeing her stunned at herself, as if she didn't expect him to speak, and a layer of gloom suddenly spread out in her heart. But his face was still white and the wind was sparse, and he didn't show any clues. He only beckoned to her and said, "Ning Er, come here." Jiang Xuning didn't know why, but after the incident from Tongzhou, her relationship with this gentleman was also harmonious, thinking that the other party had something to do, so she didn't think much about it and walked towards him. In front of him, he was still half a head shorter. Xie Wei was holding Fang Suibai's jinpsa in his hand, looked at her and frowned slightly, and then handed her the jinpsa, but continued without raising his head. "The Tongzhou incident has made love involuntarily involved, and Madame blames a child who is in danger and almost died, which is really a bit biased." Only then did Mengshi realize that he was saying to himself, and he was bluntly saying that he was biased. Her face suddenly turned blue and white. Even though Xie Wei is the emperor's teacher and Zhang Boyu's New Year's friend, he is defending Jiang Xuning in his words at this moment, which makes her feel a little dissatisfied. But the identity of the other party is really good. Even Zhang Boyu doesn't dare to offend on weekdays. He is quite careful, so he forced himself to smile and said, "It's not that the concubine is biased. The things in my Zhang mansion are not humane, and young Master Xie really doesn't know something." Jiang Xuning didn't really care about what happened behind her, but after picking up Xie Wei's jinpsa, she was a little puzzled. Is there something on her face? She picked it up and wiped it on her face, but the brocade was clean, and there was no stain at all. Xie Wei lowered his eyes and looked at it, and reminded her calmly, "Wipe your hands." Jiang Xuning looked down and found that her hands were covered in plaster. It should have been stained when he picked up a wooden stick and hit someone. She let out an "oh," said "Thank you, sir," and wiped her hands. Xie Wei looked at her, but he didn't see the obvious joy and anger on her face, the sadness and ridicule that flashed when he threw down the stick just now, as if it had never existed, and even the person standing behind him didn't seem to be her closest relatives, and she remembered that on the way back to Beijing from Tongzhou that day, when she sat in his carriage and read the letter written by Zhang Boyu, she seemed to be so numb. Sometimes the more dearest relatives in the world, the more hurtful it is. At this moment, he wanted to reach out and touch Jiang Xuning's head and tell her not to be sad, but in the end, he held it back, and saw that she had wiped the snow-white jinpsa dirty, so he smiled indifferently and raised his eyes to look at Meng's family. "The house in your mansion is private, and outsiders really don't know." Although concubine Jiang's life has passed for a long time, she has been raised under the knees of her wife, and she should have been reported as a concubine. The royal family did not notice. It's just that if you are not satisfied, others will investigate, and it is not good to cover the head of a bully. Although Ning Er is stubborn as a student, Mr. Treat also has filial piety. The little girl is irritable, and it is difficult to tame. Xie had the courage to beg for her, and asked his wife to be lenient. There is no sharp sound, but when it falls into people's ears, it splashes thunder. Mengshi's heart was shocked. Raised his head to Xie Wei, but it was a pair of gentle and quiet eyes that smiled like a spring mountain. Chapter 165, Two Clears. Meng only knew that Xie Wei was Zhang Boyu's colleague, Jiang Xuning's gentleman in the palace, but he didn't know that Jiang Xuning returned to Beijing from the Grange more than 4 years ago, and Xie Wei was walking incognito. As early as that time, he knew all the secrets of the Zhang mansion. Meng took into account the face of Jiang Suiwai, who he had raised since he was a child, and pretended that Jiang Xuning's daughter was sent to live in Zhuangzi by the master's order to avoid trouble, and concealed the secrets of their life experiences very well. Even Zhang Boyu didn't expect it. Xie Wei is an official in the court, he is calm and serious, and he can't make mistakes in his behavior, and almost everyone is used to it, including Zhang Boyu. In this seemingly gentle word, there is even more danger hidden. It's just more of an accident than panic. Originally thought that Xie Wei was a gentleman in the palace, even if he took care of his unsuccessful daughter, but he only thought that it was for the face of his colleagues, so he should not look at Sister Ning from the bottom of his heart and look at her differently. But now, it doesn't seem to be the case. At this point, if you say one more word, I am afraid that it will cause an irreparable mistake. Zhang Boyu has been an official for many years, and he knows the truth of convergence, and he is glad that Xie Wei said it mildly, no matter what, there are steps down. So he smiled, Juan said very much, Sister Ning is just naughty, don't worry. He waved his hand to the Meng family, His Royal Highness the King of Lindsay has a noble character and a sacred heart, so he should be a good match. Sister Huayer's pro-family fact is not bad, Qin Tianjian will soon set a date, there are many things to prepare at home, there are thousands of things, Mrs. should hurry up and take care of it. Meng Shi was poked in the foot by Xie Wei's words, grabbed 7 inches, and just gritted his teeth to scold Zhang Xunning's arrogance, his eyelids jumped a few times, and he didn't say anything more, and turned around. Zhang Xunning turned her back and didn't look back. Zhang Suiwai's face was ashamed, as if she wanted to say something, but this scene was really not the place for her to speak, so she had to smile bitterly, and bowed to Zhang Boyu and Xie Wei without a word, and then retreated. Zhang Xunning also buried her head and wiped her hands with the brocade handkerchief. Xie Wei looked at her with his eyes, only to see that she wiped it with a lot of force, and a large piece of red was rubbed on the back of her right hand, and the stains had clearly been wiped clean, but she didn't stop as if she was angry, and her little white face was expressionless. He said, everyone is gone. Zhang Xunning's movements stopped, and the original snow-white jimpsa was wrinkled in his hand, and it was stained, but he was embarrassed to hand it back to Xie Wei, so he left it in his hand and said in a low voice, thank you, sir. Xie Wei said, the eldest princess is ready to make peace, and she can't go to school in the palace, so she hasn't left her homework, right? Zhang Xunning was stunned. These days, she is either busy promoting the discussion of peace in the market, or she is busy seeing Xiao Dingfei and Xiao Shu fighting fiercely. Where is the word academic in her head? Subconsciously looked up at Xie Wei, but he hid a little weakness. Although she didn't speak, Xie Wei saw her shrinking posture, and she didn't have the courage to beat people with a wooden stick before, so she knew that she was wasted during this time, and only said, industry is good at diligence and frolic, although I have returned home, my studies must not be wasted. I can't wait for me to come to your house again one day, and I want to test you for 1 or 2. Zhang Xunning's head suddenly changed. The gentleman suddenly spoke for her, which really surprised her. Although she felt that she would not suffer, how could she not know the kindness of others? Just thinking about the reason, she didn't think that Xie Wei was particularly special to her, but she was afraid that it was her own situation that made Xie Wei think of something else, right? What came to her mind was the Xiao family from the previous life. My heart was awe-inspiring for a while. Xie Wei's words Zhang Xunning didn't dare to disobey at all, and nodded honestly, Mr. has taught me a lesson, and the students will return to their homework today. Her overly regular and obedient appearance inevitably made Xie Wei feel a little depressed, and with Zhang Boyu next to him, the two of them still had serious matters to discuss, so it was not good to leave her to say something, so she let her go first and prepare for her homework for the school exam another day. Zhang Xunning naturally took the opportunity to slip away. It wasn't until she quickly ran through the hanging flower gate and disappeared out of their sight that she slowed down, and even couldn't help but glance back. Xie Wei's heart is unpredictable, and the proportionality that can stop advancing and retreating is really commendable, so even people like her who know each other well can't help but be confused. What did the Xiao family and the royal family do to him back then, and what kind of deep hatred did they form that made this person tear off such a solid saint's skin and turn into a devil? In the previous life, Yu Fangyian's subtle words and expressions appeared in Zhang Xunning's mind, which actually gave rise to a little inquisitive curiosity in her heart. But the moment I thought of this, I shuddered. She immediately suppressed this thought. What is really important at the moment is to plan how to rescue Shen Zai in this dangerous situation, and the intersection between herself and Xie Wei in this life is best limited to this and not go deeper. Stop Shen Zai and his relatives, and the intersection with Xie Wei. Jiang Xuaning's heartbeat suddenly accelerated for a moment, stood in place, and slowly raised his left wrist. On the slender wrist, a light-colored scar slanted diagonally, vaguely reminiscent of the horror of the bloodline slipping from the wrist. A dangerous thought was suppressed. But another, more dangerous thought, completely uncontrolled, frantically occupied her mind, making her heart beat faster, and she couldn't shake it off no matter what. If in the previous life, she had coerced Xie Wei to let go of Jiang Wei with her old kindness when she killed herself, then, in this life, can she also use this only kindness to implore Xie Wei? Asterisk. Without warning, Shen Lang directly asked people to start investigating the case of Xiao's Ganzhou disaster relief silver, which really made the officials of the DPRK and China scratch their ears and cheeks, just because they couldn't figure out what the emperor meant. For fear of doing the wrong errand, not only did they not have any credit and hard work, but also lost their sacred heart and attracted responsibility. Xie Wei came to Jiang's mansion mainly to discuss this matter with Zhang Boyu. After the raid of the Marquis Yanji's mansion, the changes in the political situation made people fearful, and sometimes Zhang Boyu had to ask for help Xie Wei, just because this young master was famous for his foresight and strategic planning. A conversation lasted more than half an hour. During this period, Zhang Boyu never mentioned Jiang Xuaning's incident on the corridor before. It wasn't until he finished talking and was about to send someone out of the house that he laughed and said, Ning Yetu's encounter is really hard, but when her parents encounter such a troublesome thing, it is really difficult to have both. In the 2 years since she came back, she wanted to discipline her strictly. She had already suffered a lot when she was outcast. She was afraid that she would be sensitive, sad, and unhappy, and second, she was afraid that she would feel that we did not love her. She wanted to be more lenient and treat her well, but she was too loosely controlled, and she did not know the rules and human feelings, so how could she grow up? It didn't take long for her to play with Yan Shizi, and Shizi indulged her, alas, not to mention it. Xie Wei looked at him. Zhang Boyu shook his head as if he wanted to wave away that bit of depression, and then looked at Xie Wei and said, Ning Yetu has changed since she entered Beijing. Juan should also see it, and she can be regarded as growing up. I saw that Juan was willing to discipline her, and she was quite disciplined in front of Juan, and for a while I felt that I was not worthy of being a father. As an official in the same dynasty, who does not say thank you for his high behavior and openness? It's because Zhang Boyu didn't think about anything else. Xie Wei treated Jiang Xuaning differently. He only regarded it as a teacher-student friendship, and said, Juan is a person I can trust, but Ning girl, if she can learn a thing or two from Juan, and change this stubborn and ignorant problem, I will be relieved. Stubborn and ignorant? Xie Wei recalled the girl's posture, piercing people like a sharp thorn on a thorn, fragile and like a gorgeous flower on the top of a cliff, and rarely listened to Zhang Boyu's peaceful words, and felt a little uncomfortable. So he stopped. The smile on his face was so faint that he couldn't see it. He looked towards Zhang Boyu, and said slowly, Ning Er's temperament is just on the outside and soft on the inside. I'm afraid that I shouldn't have a good time when I am small, and I don't eat soft but hard. But when others give her some kindness, she will die. The girl's family shouldn't be like this, and they are abducted at every turn. When she returned to Beijing because she was uncomfortable and had insufficient education, Lord Zhang and his wife were really not disappointed by her indifference in words and deeds, and her rude manners. She is neither stubborn nor ignorant, but you don't understand. Xie didn't notice it, and it hurt her. Zhang Boyu was stunned and speechless. Xie Vian seemed to be a little depressed, and he didn't say anything more, just said farewell, walked slowly past the freshly budding wisteria trellis, and went out of the house. His carriage was waiting at the side door. But when he walked out of the door, he saw that Jianshu was not sitting on the wheel, but standing upright next to the car, and when he saw him, he also had a strange face. Xie Wei frowned. Before he could ask, a figure standing behind the car walked out and bowed to Xie Wei. "The student has seen Mr., but I've been waiting for Mr. for a while." Zhang Xuning was extremely worried, and after waiting outside for a long time, the little courage that suddenly appeared was almost exhausted in this little bit of waiting, and she almost wanted to give up and escape back to her house. Fortunately, Xie Wei came out at this time. She stepped forward to salute, barely smiling, her heart beating violently but like a drum. God knows that even when she asked him to save Zhang Xia before she committed suicide in her last life, she was not so nervous. Xie Wei didn't expect her to wait for him here, so he looked at the sword book. Jianshu shook his head at him, indicating that he didn't know. His eyes wandered, and he easily guessed, thinking that she knew that she was coming to him, and his voice softened a little. "What's the matter?" Zhang Xuning's voice trembled a little. "Student, the student wants to beg Mr. for a favor. Mr. has insight into the world and is aware of everything, and he must be clear about the wind and rain in the market. Her Royal Highness, the eldest princess of the palace, treated her students very well, but she was forced by her relatives due to the situation, and she had to go to Tatar and her relatives. Ru Mao, a barbarian clan, drinks blood. She is just a weak woman, and her identity is still special. Who knows that he will not be harmed by barbarians in the future? Although the student has a modest strength, he may not be able to save her from fire and water. I don't know if I can ask my husband to help. Xie Wei's brows suddenly furrowed slightly. Zhang Xuning was also looking at his expression as he spoke, and when he saw this posture, he was afraid that Xie Wei would not agree, so he immediately raised his left hand, and swore a curse. "Only this time will not be an example. If you are not a student to take grace, you really can't do it, and I beg your husband to help you and make it convenient. After this incident, the student and the gentleman will not owe each other, and the grievances will be cleared, and there will be no more to do with each other. We don't owe each other. Grievances are cleared. Nothing to do with it? Does she want to distance herself from him so much?" Xie Wei stared at her. His originally peaceful state of mind seemed to be swept by a violent wind, and his tense body contained an indescribable anger, and even the hand behind him was tightly clenched. A smile faded from his lips. Dark clouds slowly crept up the pupils. Zhang Xuning asked him to report the time in his last life, but he was in the main hall, and he only listened to the word "can" without fluctuation, but he didn't know what Xie Wei's expression outside the hall was. "But I think it should be a peaceful and waveless saint, like a saint who does not touch fireworks. But this moment, others stand there, like an unfathomable abyss." She actually had a feeling that she had angered the other party and would be strangled to death in the next moment, so she took a step back in horror. There was a long silence. Zhang Xuning didn't dare to speak. Xie Wei finally retracted his gaze, and smiled peacefully, as if the surging anger and emotions were just an illusion of others, and walked straight past her, and his voice was unwavering, and he didn't have more than half a word than in his previous life, only said, "Okay."